Welcome to Mixed Signals from Semaphore Media, where we're tracking the wild changes in this media age. I'm Max Tawney, media editor at Semaphore, and with me as always is our editor-in-chief, Ben Smith.
Hi, Max.
This week on the show, we are talking to Jen Psaki, the former White House press secretary under Biden and the host of an upcoming primetime show on MSNBC. We'll ask her about what cable news is for in 2025, why she disagrees with the idea that there was a cover-up of Joe Biden's mental decline, what Trump's team may sort of be doing right in the briefing room, and how she hopes her television show can help shape the future of the Democratic Party.
I'm excited about this. I feel like we have a lot of questions for Jen.
We'll get to those questions and dig into a lot more right after the break. So, Ben, I don't know if all of our listeners saw this because I don't know how many of them have Truth Social accounts, but somebody sent me a text message last night at around 9:30 p.m. on Sunday. We're recording this on Monday, and was like, do you follow Trump on Truth Social because he just tweeted something that has your name in it? And I quickly rushed over to see it and saw that the president of the United States had tweeted out a clip from this podcast, actually.
Yeah, a very, very exciting day. You don't really exist in American media until Donald Trump has engaged you at some like confusingly oblique angle. In this case, it was my admission, I suppose. So it's not new that I feel really ambivalent about publishing the dossier.
It was interesting, though. He just literally tweeted out the clip. He didn't actually have any sort of commentary or anything about it.
Yeah, it was a clip picked up by the website Just the News. And I should say thank you to our friends at Just the News who, when I frantically DM'd them, please include the link to the podcast, they very kindly did include it. That's how the media really works.
So we want to thank any new subscribers who may be coming over here from Truth Social. Tonally, the show is a little bit different, obviously, than stuff that's on
there.
But
I think that they will love and have a lot of questions for our guests today, come to think about it.
Yeah, that's a great segue. Today on the show, obviously, we have Jen Psaki. She was the press secretary under Joe Biden and is actually one of the people who emerged from his administration having a better job afterwards than she had going in. She's gone from being in the briefing room to having a primetime show on MSNBC of a similar name called The Briefing. And Ben, you've known Jen Psaki for a really long time. This has got to be a little bit strange to having seen her go from being a run-of-the-mill press flack, on campaign buses to now hosting a primetime show on one of the most watched networks in cable.
Yeah, it's funny. It is funny. I mean, I met her probably in 2007 when she was kind of mid-level PR person working for Obama. Basically a kind of professional political staffer and a good one, but not one of the ones who you felt was just absolutely desperate for the spotlight, of whom there are also a lot. And so it has been kind of surprising to watch her go from, kind of a behind-the-scenes capable person in the Obama administration into, in some sense, the most effective communicator in the Biden administration, which, by the way, low bar. But but was kind of like a beloved public face for Democrats in that context, and took that to being a very, very successful talk show host on MSNBC. Although, I mean, you covered that White House. Who was she there?
Well, it was interesting because, she obviously commanded a tremendous amount of respect as press secretary, and I think was generally really well liked by most members of the press corps, and adeptly, obviously, not answering many questions. I will say, one of my claims to fame is one of the only times I actually was in the briefing room and I did get the opportunity to ask Jen a question. She actually did. It was a media question, and she actually did answer it and make a little bit of news.
What was the question?
I asked her a question about, this was during COVID, and I asked her a question about a decision that Spotify made at the time to start putting labels on shows that talked about COVID, essentially misinformation labels. And I asked what the White House's view was on this because they had been kind of calling for something similar to it. And she said, she thanked Spotify, said she'd seen it, and said that, she was encouraged and hoped that a lot of other places tech companies and platforms would follow Spotify's lead.
That's
And,
some that's some hard that's the kind of hard-hitting journalism that you see a lot of in the White House press room, Max.
no,
Great
but
great
actually
job.
she made news because, obviously a lot of the trade press picked it up, and I think it did put some pressure on other companies. I mean, obviously the interesting thing looking back on that moment now is that all the tech companies have run in the opposite way, and all the people who used to work for her are talking about, why is there no Joe Rogan of the left?
The Joe Rogan of the left who can talking about how good food coloring is.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. But I do think that it's really interesting to have Jen on, because not only is she taking up the mantle of as the top primetime host in MSNBC at a time when cable news viewership is declining and the meaning of that role is less clear than ever, but also the party that she worked for is really in the wilderness and is trying to figure out what it means to kind of reach a lot of people who have tuned out their message and have tuned out their media.
I mean, I want to ask her about the core Biden story, the sort of sense that his age was covered up. And I do want to understand what her position is now, partly relative to all these other people we've been talking to on this show. Is what she's doing different or the same as an Ezra Klein or a Piers Morgan?
Well, I guess we should ask her about that right now because she's waiting for us. Let's bring on Jen Psaki.
Jen, thank you. Thank you so much for joining
us.
No,
of course. Thank you guys.
The challenge for us in this podcast is that I have watched you and many people have watched you basically, answer questions for an hour and definitely not make very much news. And like that obviously is like the world's worst thing for a podcast. So it's our goal. We got to get you to, loosen up and get really kind of deep and intimate with the listeners.
I'm very loosey-goosey, but it depends, Max, on your questions.
That's true.
So
that is true.
Go ahead. If you ask me all the things I've answered 1,000 times, well, then it won't
That's
be unique.
true.
Have at it.
But actually, to begin with, one thing that I think about, in watching your career is that you're not somebody who kind of tried to be a celebrity and an influencer in Washington. I remember one of the great awkward moments of the early Obama years when Politico was trying to turn staffers into celebrities, and there was "What's in your purse, Jen Psaki?"
Oh, God.
And it was sort of mortifying for us and mortifying for you. And it was like, obviously, like, Washington is full of self-promoters who just want to be on cable television. And I don't think you really are particularly that. So how did you wind up on cable television?
It's such a funny. You're right. I mean, I am not a person who goes to all of these events every week. I think I ended up here in part because when I never thought I was going to go back to the White House, first of all. So that was not my intention at the time. I was a contributor at CNN during the first Trump administration. I've known reporters. I've known you, Ben, probably since you were in New York media. Did we meet when you were in New York?
Yeah.
So there's reporters I've known. It's like I've known Glenn Thrush since he was working at Newsday, right? And all these people, I've always, I think, had a respect for media, even though we were disagreeing. I started to get contacted by networks and people who were, asking if this was something I was interested in doing. And what was appealing to me about it, though I didn't know I would like it, was I actually find, even though there's different objectives, there's similar types of kind of curious, slightly nerdy, sometimes awkward, sometimes just focused myopically on one thing type of personalities that exist in government and politics and policymaking that exist in media. And I really thought about, I've known reporters, I've worked with reporters, and even when we're as you know, I'm not like a big yell at people on the phone person, but I just still have disagreements. I was curious if it was an environment that I thought it would be like, right? Where it's just a bunch of smart, nerdy people wandering around looking for more information. And it really has been. So I wanted to see if I could do it full time. That was the question. I didn't want to be a contributor. I wanted to see if I could do it full time. So I don't know. It was sort of an unpredictable journey, not one I set out. I've never had a 5-year plan, but here I am.
Before we kind of get into talking more about your old job, which we are pretty interested in, you have this new cable show. You're going to be in primetime soon. First of all, congratulations.
Thank
you. But you're joining the primetime lineup at a moment when cable is really shifting. The network that you're working for is being spun off, from its parent company. There's all these kind of viewership changes which have shifted audiences really online. And I guess I'm curious, and I think you've probably thought about this. What's a cable show, in a primetime cable show, for in 2025?
Yeah. Well, as I used to say, there was a lot packed in there, Max. Let me see if I can do my
That's
best.
what you would say when you were stalling for time.
No, but I really do mean, well, this is a podcast, so you can ask me anything I
Yeah.
didn't answer. It's a different format.
That's true.
The way that I've thought about it is that it's clearly evolving, just to state the obvious. I don't think we have to deny that. But there's still, at this moment, are still 1 million, 2 million, depending on who you are. More for Rachel Maddow and Fox News than everybody else, but viewers who watch. And so the way I see that part of my job here, future job, is it has to be tied and connected. You want to be tied and connected to what the big story of that day was. Now, you can define what the big story of that day was. The conclave is next week, right? When my show launches. It's hard for me to envision starting my show any day with the conclave. It doesn't mean it's a huge story, is my point, right? I'm not going to start the day to give people my analysis of what's happening in the conclave. Nobody's looking to me for that, right?
I don't know. I think that'd be pretty fun and interesting, though. You could swerve a little bit.
I could really swerve, I could swerve on that just to keep people on their toes.
Yeah.
But I think of it as this is a moment once a day, 4 days a week to draw from my own background and help people understand what the heck just happened in Washington, in politics, whatever it may be. You don't know what the story is going to be. Maybe it's a Washington story. A lot of them are these days. Maybe it's a political story. But I don't think that anyone, and I think this is true for politicians too, right? There's an overlap because everybody's trying to reach people, can just kind of, I can't end my show at 10:01 and just crack open a bourbon and put my feet up till 9 o'clock the next night, because that's just not how people are consuming. So you have to think, and this will probably be an evolution for us, but I think you have to think about how are you connecting with viewers in between. You want to be, in an ideal world, your appointment television for the people who care. And yes, it's not 10 million viewers, of course not, but people tune in to Rachel Maddow every night because they want to know what she has to say about whatever it may be. Sometimes they're curious, as I am, how is she going to connect Botswana, cigarettes, and the budget debate? And she's going to, right?
Yeah.
So you want, if you do your job right, and for me, that's listen, I've been around politics and government forever, for 20 years. So if I do my job right, people learn something from what I have to say, and we have an interesting person who makes some news about that topic or another topic. But then at 10:01 or the next morning, it's well, let me do a TikTok video, let me do a YouTube conversation, whatever it may be. So I think of it as a part of what I do, not the only thing I do, if that makes sense.
Yeah. I mean, one of the things that we talk about on here a lot is this convergence between what used to be called podcasts, but now have often very high production video, and what used to be called television, but now is all over TikTok and the internet, right? And so, we this just lately, we've talked to Piers Morgan and interviewed Megyn Kelly and talked to Ezra Klein the other day.
I listened to that.
And what they're doing isn't, I don't know, is it different at all from what you're doing? I think they feel in some ways freer because partly they don't have time constraints, but also, of course, they don't have a built-in audience. But ultimately, is this the same thing, or is television still something distinct?
I think it's what is the word I'm looking for? It's like an expanded map of things that are closer and more related than people acknowledge they are, right? But I do think, yes, I mean, we did a podcast. We did 9 episodes. We're going to relaunch it in the fall. What was true about my experience, what I learned from that experience, I don't know, what I thought was interesting is I talked to some of the same people that I've talked to on television, and people are just much more relaxed. And the tone and tenor of the conversation is totally different. Why is that? We're the same people talking. I don't know entirely. And how do you take some of that and bring it to TV? Now, the TV audience still trends older. If you're an older viewer, are you still hoping that everybody you're watching on television is wearing a nice suit and nice shoes? I don't
should hope
know.
so.
Well, but why? I mean, this is the thing. I mean, I think it's a little bit, the audiences are different, as you all know, and that's what makes it interesting. But one of the things I've thought about from on the podcast to TV front is, you can't do this every show, but what we've tried to experiment with a little bit and we want to do when the new show launches is, I mean, yesterday we had Senator Adam Schiff on. He does plenty of TV. I mean, he's an accessible guy. But we were like, let's just try. We had him on for 16 minutes, 2 blocks, 2 long blocks, which, as you know, is a lifetime in cable television.
Yeah.
And it's like, I don't know. You'll know if it works or doesn't work. But to me, it's not quite podcasty, but it's a little bit, because if you can get through a block where you do the news of the day, then sometimes you can have another block where you can have different types of conversations. But yeah, I think it's all on a spectrum. That was the word I was looking for. What's challenging about it is it's part you. As much as I joked about the type of questions you're asking, it's also part the guest, right? And sometimes people can hold attention and be interesting and compelling. And sometimes you run out of steam after a bit, right? And it's still a business. And you still want to keep people. I mean, the dream for any TV cable host is you keep people through the show, right? You don't have a massive drop off. I don't know that we would do one guest for a whole show. I think that would be great. We probably not, because that's just so much time.
That's for the Barack Obama booking, right?
Sure. Barack Obama, come on down. We'll have you on for the whole show.
I agree with, I think, one thing that the new Trump administration is doing when it comes to the briefing room, which is kind of shaking up who gets to ask the first question, who has access to the briefing room, and not just kind of following the same order that's been used for 20 or 30 years. And it does, in my view, kind of align with the ways in which media is changing and which the hierarchy isn't as clear maybe as it always was. And I'm really curious, actually, what you think about it. Set aside for a second, the rhetoric and kind of just generally sometimes the rudeness that this White House has towards the press. Do you think that they kind of have something there? Do they have a point about, that this order that we followed for a long time is like maybe a little bit antiquated?
Yeah, I would say they have a half a point in this sense. They're right that it's outdated. The briefing room is outdated. The way that it's structured, the way the seating works, the way who asks questions, like or hate Sean Spicer, and Melissa McCarthy, that's all I think about. I can't get Melissa McCarthy out of my head. He actually tried to bring a screen in and try to bring other people who couldn't be physically in the briefing room. I actually think that was very smart to do. We did that a little bit. We could have done more of it, because in 2016, when I was leaving as Obama's comms director, if Hillary Clinton had won, we would have said to them, don't do a briefing every day. Do it 2 or 3 times a week. And then other days do something else. Do a gaggle, do a, which is off camera, do just regional reporters, do other media that isn't in Washington, whatever it may be. It's long overdue. But what I think is troubling, at least to me, is that their whole talking point about we're going to change the way it's done is cover for them for cutting out media who, frankly, have given press secretaries and White Houses a hard time for good reason for decades, right? So, yeah, bring some new people in. I don't even care if they are left, right-leaning. But then you're cutting out wire reporters and all these other people from the conversation who are actually asking questions about maybe they're boring, but government functioning and policymaking that now you have less of, and that's not a big part of what you do. And I think my bet is that they're trying to make it more and more Marjorie Taylor Greene's boyfriend and others like him than the AP, right? That's the troubling part. It's cover for that, in my view.
I think they're a little torn, right? They do take their share of questions, quite a few from the fake news media, as they like to call them. And in fact, Trump picked up the phone for an Atlantic reporter the other day, I noticed. I mean, I think they're a little torn because he likes to mix it up. And I think and Ezra said this, they obviously see a benefit to the heat that comes from tough questions. Sort of interesting. But so what do you make of Carolyn? Do you know her? Have you ever talked?
No, I don't know her. I think if the totality of the job, and it's part of the job, that's an important part of the job, was somebody who was good on television, which she is, who could command the room, which she can. And there are a lot of press secretaries, Democrats and Republicans, who can't do that and can be eaten alive by that room. If the totality of it was that, and just speaking what was on the mind of your boss, then yeah, she should get good marks for that. That's not the totality of the job.
What's the other part?
The other part of the job is speaking honestly and candidly about the issues that are happening in the country and providing actual useful information to people. And what she's doing is she is just projecting the view of Donald Trump. That's part of it. It's not the only part. And I also think that, I mean, she's a person who goes out there on a regular basis and projects propaganda points, right? What I would consider propaganda points. I know the right wing says that about me, but that is just not the same, guys.
So what's the difference?
The difference is she is projecting things like, no, we didn't illegally deport anyone. You didn't? I mean, the courts just said you did, you know? I mean, she is projecting, oh, Elon Musk is accomplishing his goal. He is? Well, he is.
But wait a
1%
second. You had your share of underperforming, normal stuff, underperforming cabinet members say, and somebody says, is so-and-so doing a good job? You never went up and said, no, like he's kind of screwing it up.
Ben, I don't watch her briefing, honestly. I see clips of it, but I don't think any human being who's being objective would say that I did the same thing that she is doing.
No, I agree.
So I think that, and I don't think I need to list examples of that. I think that's pretty apparent.
Let's take a quick break, and we'll be right back with Jen Psaki. This week in our branded segment from Think with Google, I spoke to Google's VP of Marketing, Josh Spanier, about how to meet consumers where they are, whether they're searching, scrolling, streaming, or shopping.
So the big story of 2024 was just this massive fragmentation of media, this incredibly confusing landscape for people like us to look at, a place in which consumers, can deeply personalize what they're listening to, what they're seeing, what they're reading. And I think that makes it hard for people in your position, for marketers, to find consumers at the right place and the right time. And so how do you think about navigating that?
So I recently went to a museum and I saw up close a beautiful Jackson Pollock painting, one of his splatter canvases. And as I stood in front of that beautiful painting, I really was thinking about my own marketing services industry, as you described. The complexity of every surface and touch point and device of PR and comms and media and AI and content, and how it all has sort of blurred together. And it is somewhat overwhelming. But then part of my job, and part of every good marketer's job, is to take a step back and try and see, I guess, the signal in the noise, or the shapes in the patterns, like you do with the Jackson Pollock. One of the things I've used is a framing around 4 key consumer behaviors: streaming, scrolling, searching, and shopping. And what we're seeing across Google's product mix and all our properties is these activities, these key human behaviors, are sort of intersecting through technology. And when we understand the consumer journeys that people are taking, we as marketers can actually help navigate those paths and actually intersect in ways which are useful and additive to consumers. So that may be someone using Google Lens with their phone, just taking a picture of something and searching for it, or it may be someone watching and strolling through YouTube, pausing a video and using Circle to Search to search for a watch that someone in that video is wearing, and getting instantaneously a Google search shopping result, which allows you to buy that watch and then go back to watching the video. This framing, streaming, scrolling, searching, and shopping, is helping us really think through these different pathways and where we can be useful from both a technological and a marketing engagement perspective to help unpack this complex dynamic landscape, to make mess from the noise, just as Jackson Pollock helps us do with his paintings.
Brave new world. Where can people learn more about consumer behavior today?
You can head to thinkwithgoogle.com, and there's bursting with great content, great articles, and great videos to learn about this streaming, scrolling, searching, and shopping principle.
Your old boss, Joe Biden, is, going to be in the news again, or is starting to be in the news again, because the time has elapsed between the campaign and now we're getting some of the books that have come out. Yes, there's a lot of books to be. There's a lot of books to be sold. Yes, exactly. Of which I'm sure you've gotten a lot of calls from those reporters 6 months ago, and now that's starting to bear fruit. I guess I was really curious. You mentioned this on Dylan Byers' podcast, and I wanted to kind of draw something out a little bit further from it, which is, you mentioned how there was a moment in between the debate between Biden and Trump and when Biden dropped out, in which you said that Biden probably didn't have a path forward, and that was kind of a difficult thing for you to kind of do, as obviously someone who had defended him and his administration and been a very visible face within his administration. I mean, I'm curious what that moment was like for you, and what the reaction was from your colleagues, many of whom are still in the White House, or felt that Biden shouldn't drop out.
Well, we can roll the tape, but I don't think I said it was difficult to do. I just think I acknowledged that there was a reaction from people who were strong Biden supporters online.
Wait, sorry, that wasn't difficult to do.
Well, I don't think that's what I stated. I don't think I've said that. I wouldn't describe it that way. I mean, I think, you know, when it really started with the debate and watching the debate. And watching the debate, you know, I remember thinking halfway through, and I think I said to, I mean, anyone watching would have thought this, said to my colleagues, because I was about to go do hours of television afterwards, like, this is a fucking disaster, right? Which it was, of course. And then afterwards, you know, we all went on television, and I don't remember exactly how I phrased it, but I think I said what I had seen, right? Which was that. I didn't say fucking, because you can't say that on MSNBC, but some version of that. I didn't know what was going to happen from there. I don't think anybody exactly did. It just became clear, and what I started saying on television was, I'm talking to a lot of Democrats who are saying, you know, it's like, it's not for me to determine if he has a path forward, that there is not a path forward, right? That they don't see a path forward. And that was more what I tried to stay centered in every day, was who I was actually, you know, I've been in this town, I've worked in Democratic politics for a long time, what people privately were telling me, which was an indication of where this was headed. The reaction, and still to this day, I will tell you, you can't look at Twitter, you can't look at people's replies, because they'll be hiding under your desk. Anyone would be. But sometimes they pop up. I'm like, I don't know how to turn off some of these. So like, and it's like, to this day, you know, it's like the new show is announced, and I have people like, I will never watch her show. She stabbed Joe Biden in the face, you know? And it's like, I didn't determine the past. I am telling you what Democrats who are telling me, including people on the campaign I was talking to at the time. So that was my experience in the moment. You know, I think what I also, this is where it's like, I hope I can continue to be a contributor in this way to the conversation, is like, there also can be a leap to, well, it's going to be Kamala Harris and nobody's going to challenge her, right? Including on cable television conversations. And I was like, maybe or maybe not. Do you remember that period of time where we didn't exactly know? It's like, well, the DNC is saying this is how the process is going to go. Is it going to go that way? I have no idea. But yeah, I think it was difficult because, you know, and this was as difficult about that period of time. Yes, random people, who cares, who are messaging me. But I care about him personally, right? I like him as a person. And there were people, I didn't actually hear from them, honestly. They didn't reach out to me to say they were pissed, to say anything at the time. They knew.
But to go back before that, I mean, I think that like when at least for a time, when the history of this period is sort of written and understood, I think there's a consensus that the media generously missed and ungenerously covered up Joe Biden's frailty. And I just want to read you something Ezra said in, oh gosh, this is like the Ezra Klein show readout now. But that Ezra said in February 2024. So this is while, you know, during the presidency, I have this nightmare that Trump wins in 2024, and then in 2025 and 2026, out come the campaign tell-all books, and they're full of emails and WhatsApp messages between Democratic staffers and Democratic leaders where they're all saying to each other, this is a disaster. He's not going to win this. I can't bear to watch this speech. We're going to lose. But they didn't say any of it publicly. They didn't do anything because it was too dangerous for their careers, too uncomfortable, given their loyalty to Biden. I mean, that feels like where we are. And what do you make of that question? Did the White House cover this up? Did the media cover this up? Like, what, just sort of in retrospect, and you weren't in the White House in those later moments, but how do you read this? I mean, something I feel I have complicated feelings about, but I'm curious what you think.
I mean, I obviously do too. I think cover up is such a loaded phrase. But I also, to your point, I left in May of 2022, just for the facts here. And I have seen Biden once since then, when I took my daughter to the holiday party this last December after he had lost. And so I hadn't seen him in person during that period of time. I never saw that person, not a single time. And I was in the Oval Office every day that was on that debate stage. I'm not a doctor. Aging happens quite quickly. Were things that people saw during that period of time that were similar to that, or would have been in a category of that? I don't know, possibly, right? And all these books are going to tell us.
But let's sort of take it in two pieces. First, like your old colleagues, like, I mean, and you talk to these folks, I talk to these folks. Like, do you think that were they actively covering it up? Were they sort of in denial, or was that just a bad debate? Like, what is your read on that?
Well, this is what I mean about cover up is a very loaded term. I think.
Well, it means you knew that it was really bad and you're pretending otherwise versus you're deluding yourself, which I think is what people do a lot.
Well, I understand, but I still think it's like cover up is often like a crime, right? We're talking when people use that term.
They say it's worse
phrase,
than the crime.
People use that term as they relate to
Yeah.
Watergate or the covering up of not sharing public information about a war.
Yeah, and I'm not accusing anybody of a crime.
I understand,
here,
but other people have used that term, and I think it's a bit of a dangerous term. I don't know. I have not talked to them, any of the people in these books, about this particular question. I think that at their root, a lot of the people who are mentioned are good human beings. And so I like to think that, no, they would not be a part of an active, let's hide from the public what we see happening privately. And I don't know the facts of what was happening privately.
Right. And then what about us? Like you, I guess you and me in the media now. Were we... I mean, I think I wrote, I wrote about his age once or twice, got beat up on social media, but also didn't really feel like it particularly moved the needle. I mean, do you feel like we were too tentative writing about it? It's a sensitive thing to write about. I mean, and it was hard to report, or do you think I don't know, should we have been more aggressive about it in 23, 24 as a story? Because it obviously, in retrospect, pretty big story.
Well, what I don't know, Ben, and maybe we'll learn from these books, is what the facts were behind the scenes. So what the media missed. And maybe the media missed a lot. And so maybe in retrospect, which is always easier to be critical of the media about, frankly, right? There were major stories and moments missed. What I think is challenging, if you don't know about what's happening privately, right, is that Joe Biden was in his early 80s during that period of time. We all knew his age. That was not a secret. What was happening behind the scenes, I don't know. What was also true that I would find actually a little tricky if you're a reporter of any kind, is that while we know there were problematic things behind the scenes now in 23 and 24, there was an aggressive all-out pitching operation from the right wing and from the Republicans about Joe Biden's age and how he was in decline and like sleeping in the Oval Office, a lot of which wasn't true, the majority of which wasn't true in 2019, 2020, 2021, 2022, right? So it makes you, I know the feeling, right? Like you're under attack for, like there's this distorting effect of like you're in this noise machine, you're under attack, you fight back, and at some point there's some underlying reality that slips away or something. Which is, yes, that's what I'm getting at, right? Is like, that was and it worked. I mean, when we got polling before 23 and 24, on nearly a weekly basis, I mean, the biggest vulnerability for Biden was his age, right? Even before all this.
I mean, they were correct, weren't they? Like they were saying this guy is too old to be president, and like it wasn't just spin. Like it really turned out they were correct. At best, he aged very fast in those last couple of years.
Well, that may be, but here's the thing. My experience with him was that he was a person who told a very long story in the Oval Office, but that was the case 30 years earlier, right? So how do you differentiate? I don't know. You can still be critical of people for not differentiating, right?
Yeah.
And also was still somebody who put together a coalition to address Ukraine, who still was the person primarily negotiating big legislative deals. So it's like, what does it mean that he wasn't able to be in that period of time? Should he have run? I think if he had not run, this would have been a different thing, right?
Yeah, totally.
Different conversation. Because
do you wish? I mean, in retrospect, you must wish he hadn't.
Of course, because I think in the period of time I worked for him, and later, he did a lot of great things. I'm not saying everybody has to agree with him; they don't. But he did a lot of great things as president, and I think that a lot of his legacy has become, for at least this period of time, based around this question of him running for re-election, not being aware that or not being honest with himself about not being able to do another full term.
Do you think that'll change? I mean, I agree with you. I think that for the next 5 years, that's going to be the story of Joe Biden, was the decision to run, his age. Do you think, but do you think when John Meacham is writing the book, the history books, if it's John Meacham, obviously it'll be very positive. But, when
John Meacham who helped write the State of the Union?
When the historians of the future who did not work for Joe Biden are writing these books, how much of that book is about this, is about his age?
I think I've never thought about this question, but my gut reaction here is that I think it depends on what happens in 2028. Because I think if Trump runs or whoever, I know, well, this is possible. I mean, tries to run, it's not legal, but I don't know. Or Josh Hawley or JD Vance or some continuation of an iteration of the MAGA movement continues, then this moment and this election will be thought of as an even greater breaking moment in history. And Joe Biden will get some blame for that, right? And, is that fair? Is that not fair? That will be debated in the history books. If is somebody else who has a different, maybe it's a Democrat. I don't think the Republican Party is nominating someone different from the MAGA movement in 3.5 years, but we'll see. Then I think that could impact the history books on Joe Biden, because it will be seen as not a blip, but not a history-changing moment.
Yeah. So when you were in the White House, I used to talk to a lot of your staff, and I think they made points somewhat, quite correctly about the vapid nature of some cable news segments that were, so horse race focused or not focused enough on the issues. And I'm really curious, do you ever find yourself, now that you are a cable host who has to fill an hour every single night, falling into any of the traps? Or do you have more sympathy for some of the hosts and cable news executive producers who have to, fill time and program it? Do you ever find yourself doing some of those things that annoyed you?
Well, yes. I mean, here's the thing. Head-to-head polls at the national level tell you nothing. I still think this. I've said this publicly. That is coming from my past background. So it does inform, some of the things that drove me completely insane from being a spokesperson to, I think, inform how I approach this. The other thing that's kind of been funny is, as somebody who wrote talking points for people for 20 years, is now people will come on TV and they won't stop talking, and they're just like, you ask them about democracy and they're talking about bridges, and you're like, what the hell, So that is also a truth.
Medicine.
That's also a truth. One thing that I think is what I get annoyed with everybody about is the head-to-head polls and that sort of thing, and this proclamation that happens sometimes on cable sets of the Democrats will win back the House in November of next year. It's well, how do we know that? I mean, there's lots of trends, but there's lifetime of 100 news stories between now and then. So those type of predictions things have always driven me crazy, and I try not to do that now, but sometimes you're forced to because you get asked a question.
There is this divide in media between people who approach it from authority and people who approach it from curiosity, right? As in, I'm going to tell you what's going to happen, and let's explore, what's going on here, and maybe we'll come up with some theories, or maybe not, and who knows. And I actually do really think that people usually approach it from one or two sides. I approach this with curiosity. Ben approaches with authority. I think that's how this podcast works.
Huh. Wow. That's a great insight, Max.
I'm just joking, by the way.
Though, Jen, imagine trying to explain, when I'm not sure when we first met in person, maybe in 2007, I have some vague image of you, getting on one of the buses in Iowa when I was sitting in the back.
An evergreen memory
But, can you
for
imagine
many
trying
reporters.
to explain to us then what we are doing now?
Well, I know, it's even in the evolution of media, think about it, right? I mean, it's just, imagine telling people at that moment, the Today Show will be in their homes for a year and a half or however long it was, right? Or some of the most popular things will be people in ripped T-shirts talking with a microphone in their basement. It's are you saying bloggers will have some sort of means of communicating and we'll see who they are? It's just
we're letting the bloggers out.
We're letting
in fact,
the
all of
bloggers.
the bloggers, all of the annoying bloggers of that era are the most influential. That's Ezra Klein and Matt Iglesias. Yeah, it's hilarious.
People will be paying attention more to what the bloggers are saying than any network nightly news broadcast, or most of them, right? So yes, it would have been hard to explain at the time.
Yes, the blogger in that case is wearing a suit on our show.
I know. I'm like, what's the deal with the suit, Ben?
And
You have to bring us casual.
And Jen is the towering figure in nightly news. So
We'll see.
What a world!
What a world!
Thanks so much for joining us, Jen. This was fun.
Thank you, guys.
Jen, we really appreciate it, and good luck on the new show.
Thank you so much.
What did you make of her answer on this? I do think it'd be the big question looking back of what happened with the White House and Joe Biden's age. I mean, do you buy that she doesn't talk to people? I don't know.
I thought it was really sharp, the distinction that you drew between, this idea of an active cover-up, as in, holy shit, we know something is really bad and we have to avoid the public knowing this, and delusion. And I really do think, and you see this in among people who are close to Trump and people who are close to any leader, anyone who drinks the Kool-Aid. I feel this way about semaphore, sometimes, in which people, you really see what you want to see, and you see like the good things, and you tend to push aside in your mind the things that might kind of cause you to have some doubts. And I think that was an important distinction. But I don't know, Ben, what did you think of her response there?
I don't know people in that very inner circle very well. I did talk, wrote about over the summer to a very panicked person in an outer circle saying, like, there's a cover up. We've got to stop these people. And I tend to think that we underestimate that people are usually telling the truth as they see it. Even people doing like very bad, crazy things have usually deluded themselves into thinking they're doing the right thing. And I think people watch House of Cards and they imagine that like it's full of these sort of brilliant cynics, but as we all know, it's always much more Veep.
Yep.
Yeah, I mean, you can kind of see, although Jen, she was very, very close to the situation. Sort of interesting to watch her wrestle with that. I think journalists also need to. I mean, your old partner Alex Thompson gave a speech saying, I think very optimistically, that people would trust the media more if we admitted that we made mistakes. I'm not sure it actually does make people trust you more, but obviously there is some question of how did we let them get away with this? As I think about it, I really do think that part of the answer is just access. Like the president, we don't live in a world where you can just hide behind layers of gatekeepers. If you're in one of these jobs and there's some question about whether you can hold a conversation, you just got to put yourself. There's no excuse for just not being out there engaging with journalists and with everybody else. And I think that's when I look back, it's like just how infrequently he was in loose, unscripted situations was a huge red flag and should have been a bigger scandal at the time.
Exactly. He couldn't do it. And that gets at your point between delusion and, this kind of cover up. People knew in the back of their minds that there was a lot of risk of putting him out there in these situations, or maybe didn't even know in the back of their minds. They knew quite clearly and crafted strategies very much around that. And maybe they were telling themselves like, oh, he's a little too loose and we can't really have him be doing that, but he is really smart and ends up making the right decisions. But the reality was when it comes down to it, you can perform in those times.
I mean, the one place, and I'm totally sympathetic to Jen in this, but the one place where I did feel like she had the sort of like melted brain that comes with being in the White House was these bad people were attacking us over his age. And so we had to push back and these were lies. And like maybe the lies became true at some point, but they were still lies. And there is like a impulse, I think it's broadly in this kind of social media space, that if the guys on the other team are saying something negative, you have to just like fight back and you can't consider that it's true.
But, one of the interesting things that I'm really curious about was I think the surprise of Jen Psaki becoming kind of this really, really popular personality on cable news. Personally, I didn't really see it at first.
Didn't see it coming either. Yeah. I mean, she didn't see it coming.
She clearly didn't see it. I mean, what do you make of her role in the ecosystem, and what you think she represents both to MSNBC, and her popularity, surprising popularity, represents more broadly about what liberals are looking for in media?
I mean, I think she won the hearts of a lot of liberals as somebody who could stand up to the running dogs of the media. These terrible media people who were attacking poor President Biden, and Jen was very good at standing up to us. And I think that bought her just an enormous amount of affection from Democrats who then are interested in watching her and seeing what she has to say on MSNBC. And she's turned out to be really good at that. But I do think that her in the press room fighting back against the terrible media is basically what bought her all that love in the first place. Thanks for bringing her on, Max. I think that was an interesting interview.
Yeah, it's really fun, I think, to kind of get to see, you got to see her at a very different point in her career. I got to engage with her a little bit as White House press secretary, and now we both get to cover her as people who write about and think about the media. It's totally fascinating, and it'll be really interesting to watch where the show goes from here. So thanks, Ben.
Well, that's it for us this week. Thanks for listening to Mixed Signals from Semaphore Media. Our show is produced by Sheena Ozaki, with special thanks to Max Toomey, Britta Galanis, Chad Lewis, Rachel Oppenheim, Anna Pizzino, Garrett Wiley, Jules Zern, and Tori Kaur. Our engineer is Rick Kwan. Our theme music is by Billy Libby. Our public editor is Alex Thompson. And if you like Mixed Signals, please follow us wherever you get your podcasts and feel free to review us. I don't know where Max went, but if he was here, he would tell you that if you want more, you can always sign up for Semaphore's media newsletter out every Sunday night. And please add us to your secret group chats.